Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's live discussion, counting down my top 25 favorite episodes of the entire Star Trek franchise. Been doing it for over 2 years. Almost finished, almost to the finish line. We got one more after this because we're to my number two second favorite episode of the entire franchise, which is the Next Generation episode, The Inner Light. I'm joined here by the usual guest. First of all, Alyssa. Alyssa, thanks so much for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm sorry. I know Brandon, I don't see him in the chat yet, but I apologize in advance. The line that keeps coming into my mind that it's been a long road getting from there to here because we've been doing this since number 25, and I haven't been on every single one. I've missed a few here and there, but that was a couple years ago, and and at the time I remember thinking, oh, it's gonna be a long time before we get to number one, and we're almost there. Here we are at number two, so excited to be on this journey.
Yes, and also joining me, this is not my beautiful wife. It is Darrin. Darrin, thanks so much for joining.
Oh, real excited to be here. Yeah, it's been a long journey. I've been excited to get to join you and Alyssa on this little countdown. It's always a fun kind of adventure, especially when we get to these kind of topics. What are the little differences? What are the particularities that each episode kind of talk to you, personally, or other big fans that really make this or that episode, its position on the list. So it's been an exciting time, and I'm glad to get down here almost to the end because we are talking about some magnificent episodes.
And I do have to apologize if my eyes seem a bit red or if I'm a bit sniffling because I just finished watching this episode. And it has that kind of effect. But so let's get into overall thoughts on the episode, what we think of the episode as a whole. Obviously, I love this episode. I named it my favorite episode of TNG, and I don't think it's not like an episode I would say that represents TNG. That's like a typical episode of TNG or is representative of all the characters because it is a Picard episode. But that's never really necessarily consideration when I'm thinking of what my favorite episode is of a show. It's more of like what hits me the most emotionally and what I think is constructed the best and very well. And I think that's definitely this episode because I think the writing is like a near masterpiece. It's just the whole pacing, how it gets you involved in the story, and the acting is beautiful. And there's a lot of like subtle things about it that really hit you in the feels. So for me, it's always been one of the most emotionally powerful, emotionally impacting stories ever that I've ever consumed. And so that's why it landed this high for me because I think it's a particularly piece of art, even if it's not necessarily like representative of TNG as a whole, but is a great character for a story for Picard for sure. But anyway, Darrin, will come to you next. Overall thoughts on the episode.
Yeah, like I said, this is one of those real fascinating when you're like, this is my number one TNG episode. This is the number two on the list. I was like, really? The flute episode? But damn, you are right. Because again, just having watched it, it builds beautifully and it gets you that emotional payoff. And Patrick Stewart does an amazing job of delivering that at the end, and the kind of subtle reflection and everything it is a beautifully done emotional piece. It is, on the other hand, a very simple, straightforward story. And you're right, it is not your typical kind of bigger Star Trek episode, and either dealing with a big philosophical question or dealing with what is right, what is wrong, or a big action stuff or a big character type of thing. This is very much a Picard experience, and the show brings us along with it very beautifully. But as you say, it's not what you would think is a typical big TNG episode. And I do remember when it came out, you know, earlier in the season, we had like cause and effect and things like that are huge ones on my personal stuff. And while this is a beautiful show, it's a beautiful episode. It's not one of those that I would have thought would be this long, would reverberate so much as the series really matured. But you're right, it is one of the better ones of the episode. It's just, I don't know, it's a beautiful kind of quiet story and experience for Picard. And it's, I said, it's not whiz bang, but it really is deeply emotional, satisfying. And there is no way you can finish this without tears in your eyes. It's just, I think it's impossible.
Sorry, I can't. I'm stuck on Darren's username. I keep thinking about it. And Picard arrives and he says, "This is not my beautiful house. This is not my beautiful wife. How did I get here?" That sums up the episode. Yeah, this episode, I've gone on kind of an up and down journey with it over the years. When it first premiered, and I remember like being quite bored by it, to be perfectly honest with you. And if I recall correctly, I believe it was the penultimate episode of the season, or at the very least, it was toward the end of the season.
No, penultimate is correct.
Yeah, it was the penultimate.
Yes.
And I remember like, it ended and I was like, God, this is boring. And like, oh, next week's episode, oh, we're going to do time travel. Oh, that's exciting. And like now I think Time Zero like blows, particularly part 2. I think part 1 was okay. But so I just, didn't get that episode. And then later on, years later, I started seeing people like putting in their top 10 lists and saying it was a great episode. And I was like, really? And then so I gave it another shot and I was like, then I got it. And then I started to get it and I'm like, oh, wow. Yeah, this is a truly great episode. It's obviously fantastic performance by Patrick Stewart. The concept is just really imaginative and really fascinating, like living an entire lifetime in a 20-minute period. All of that is really good. And as you said, it's a very emotional, tear-jerky type of episode. So, I had it as one of my top of TNG for a while as well, or at least in the top 5. When I went to look at my top 100 last year, or I guess over a year ago now, was 2020, toward the end of 2023. I ended up moving it back slightly, just because when I look at TNG, like I guess I may be a little different from you, Mark. I do take a lot into account of how does this represent the full cast? How does this represent the full show? Not just simply be a platform for Patrick Stewart to show off his acting, and like we barely see any of the other characters. So I do think that kind of pushed it back a little bit in my overall rankings of TNG, because I did start to really prioritize, like I wanted to represent the whole show and the whole cast. So I think that might be why I don't have this as my best Next Generation episode, and I'll tell you where I have it in my top 100 later on when you ask that question, but it's not number 2. So it's kind of been like I hated it, then I loved it, and now I still love it, but maybe not quite as much as I had loved it. So that's sort of my roller coaster journey, but I still ended up in my top 25 of all Star Trek. So don't get me wrong, like it's still in the top 25 of like 800 episodes or whatever. So I still consider it a great episode for all the same reasons that you talked about, Mark. But that's kind of that's been my journey with this episode over the years.
Yeah, and we talked about this earlier this month when we did the my viewership's top 10 episodes. Is that I also didn't like this episode when it first came out. I was 14 at the time, but I thought it was extremely boring. And the first I ever heard that people liked it was when they did, right before they aired All Good Things, they did like a top 5 voted by the viewers, and this was number 4. And I was like, really, this boring episode is number 4? What? And that's when I started to look at it differently. And I think definitely by the time I was 18, I was in love with the episode. So it didn't take me too long. But I remember when I was in high school, and we used to, for English class, I used to write these journals, whatever, and I wrote this entry about what is going to be my number 1 that episode. And my English teacher was like, "Oh, I'm interested," and I was like, "Yeah, you should watch it. It's airing tonight at a certain time." He tuned in at the wrong time, and it just so happened they were showing this episode, and he watched this episode instead. I was like, "Oh my god, this episode was so amazing! Is this the one you're talking about?" Like, no, you watched the wrong episode. This one's boring. But no, I can see why though. And I've shown this to a couple other people who have never seen Star Trek before, and they instantly loved it. So I always look at this episode as the best episode to show someone who has never seen Star Trek before. You're trying to get it. Doesn't necessarily give them an idea of what Star Trek is like, but it does tell them, like, hook them by a really good episode. Although I guess the caveat to that is people who are really into drama. If they're into action, it's probably something else. But yeah, I think it's definitely one of those great gateway episodes. But anyway, I want to say hello to everyone in the chat. We got Brandon and Jordan. Thanks so much for joining. And Jordan's gave a $50 super chat. Thanks so much. Very generous. Saying, Mark, during your last live chat of In the Pale Moonlight, you forgot a disclaimer. Once the credits roll, unless you hit the back button, you'll be subjected to Vic Fontaine's sorrowful rendition of "You're Nobody Till Somebody Loves You." Yes, I should have made that disclaimer. That if you're watching it on a streaming services, make sure to skip the next episode. Don't need to see it.
I would object to the use of the word soulful in that sentence.
Yeah, maybe annoying would be a better adjective. Yeah. I think. See, I took the word soulful as a sarcastic. Like,
sure.
Yeah.
Sure. To me, subjected said it all right there. I think that perfectly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
I guess I would just be more blunt than sarcastic in that. But yeah, you're right.
This piece of shit will make your ears bleed. Oh, sorry, no, that's maybe too far. I don't know. But anyway, so I want to start with this episode by talking about some of the writing involved. So I think the backstory and how this episode was written was pretty interesting. So the writer of this episode was Morgan Gindel. He had the story by credit, and I believe a teleplay by credit, but he shared the teleplay credit with Peter Allen Fields. But in interviews, he was saying basically he did most of the script. Peter Allen Fields just helped dot the I's and cross the T's and help spruce it up, and was mainly responsible for the scenes with Picard and Helene, like this, particularly the scene where Helene died. But most of it was written by Morgan Gindel, and I was, listening to some comment. And I don't know if it was a commentary, but it was a thing in the Blu-rays. They had this whole speech where he was talking about this episode a lot, and I lost his writing credits. So he was, before he did this, he wrote on shows like 21 Jump Street, Jake and the Fat Man, Law and Order. I'm trying to think of so it's mainly like cop shows,
I
And-
forgot all about Jake and the Fat Man.
Yeah.
We just mentioned it just now. Wow.
Yeah.
That's old school.
And he wrote the TV movie Chips '99. It was like apparently that cop show Chips. They did a movie of it in '99 apparently. But anyway,
I actually remember that. But yeah.
Oh, you don't? I
No,
don't.
I do. I do. That's what I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh no, I'm saying you do, but I don't. That's what I'm
okay.
saying. Yeah. I don't remember that at all. Yeah. But so and also the other Star Trek episodes he wrote was Starship Mine, the Die Hard episode in season 6, and in Deep Space Nine he wrote The Passenger and the Armageddon Game. And if you don't remember what episodes those are, I don't blame you because they're very forgettable. So it's very strange. And I look at it, his background, and it's like he also wrote for the 100 more recently. But it is still, I find it very strange that this, like what I think of as a masterpiece drama, is written by someone who's mostly into like cop shows or action adventure stuff. But so the backstory is that apparently in season 4, Michael Piller came up with this idea that Picard somehow lives a different life within like a short span of time, but nobody could break that idea, and they kind of forgot about it. And all the writers tried to break it, and no one could get it. But then when Morgan Gindel came in, he pitched an idea for a ray that shoots like Picard, Riker, and someone else, can't remember who, and that they're sent to this like war-torn planet, and apparently it was like a message from this planet that was destroyed by war, and it was a warning, as a big huge anti-war, anti-Holocaust message. And eventually that got withered down to just Picard, and for the longest time it was war that destroyed the planet that Picard lived on. It was a huge anti-war message. But Michael Piller worked very closely with Morgan Gindel, and I feel like even though this is definitely his Gindel's script, I could feel Piller's touch because he's the sort of character stories is his specialty, and I think he's helped shape it in the right direction. And eventually, got him to move towards just a character piece about Picard and ditch the war aspect, which I think, I'm sure the war storyline would have been good too, but the way this turned out was perfect as well. And is another interesting story that Morgan Gindel told was that sort of late in the writing process, he floated the idea of Piller of a flute, of that Picard would learn how to play a flute, and that he would get the physical flute at the end of the episode. And Piller responded by laughing in his face, saying, "That's ridiculous, you're joking." And then so Morgan Gindel apparently went home and wrote like this huge speech and trying to convince Michael Piller. It's like, I wrote this like huge speech and like practicing, I gotta convince you to do the flute. And the next day he's ready to pitch it, and then Piller goes up to him and says, "You know what? I've been thinking more about this flute. It's actually a good idea. Go ahead and do that." So he didn't even have to pitch it at all. But anyway, so I found all that really interesting. Oh, the other thing I should mention is that Morgan Gindel apparently gives lectures and like writing classes and stuff all about this episode, and he says that it is the piece of work in his whole career that he's most proud of out of anything, and I can definitely see why. But anyway, Darrin, do you have any thoughts to add or any thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's interesting you say that when you're doing comparison with all of his other kind of work, but that it was Piller that kind of maybe smooth and controlled, and that's sometimes where the proper combination, the proper kind of teamwork. You may have a great idea, but your execution and the way you set it all up isn't going to work. I mean, I think there's a great Elton John, Bernie Taupin stories of like, Elton's earlier stuff before Bernie was just kind of crap. He had sort of a mellow, but his lyrics were all crap. And it was Bernie that came in, and with the two of them was able to make the kind of, legend that became Elton John. So to me, this kind of makes a lot of sense. Um, an interesting thing about this is also just the way that the season kind of plays out, and the fact that this is the penultimate episode. The fact that it's not a war story, which would be big and loud, explosion action, that it's a very subtle story is, from just a storytelling pacing standpoint, a nice breath before you get into whatever big adventure it is. Obviously, they were playing the big time travel and going back to the West and stuff that they do have. Yeah, a lot of opinions on how well that's actually executed. But no, I think it's interesting that they were able to kind of piece it down to very much an experiential type of thing. And I think that that's what really becomes the breadth of it, because you can get the same message, oh, remember us, but doing it from a much more of appreciating life as opposed to being warned of war, which is kind of what a lot of Star Trek episodes are about. So this makes a zig as opposed to a zag, and I think that was, you know, that was some good choices.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the flute story because it's not the first time I've heard you tell that story, and it just tickles me to death that Michael Piller and his initial reaction was to laugh in his face and say that's ridiculous. Because when you kind of think about it on the surface, it does kind of sound ridiculous, like like him. Patrick Stewart playing this like basically a recorder, like this elementary school flute like recorder thing, and then like it just happens to be in the probe, and then he gets it at the end. Like just on the surface, that does sound ridiculous, but then when you watch it, I'm like, oh, he's playing the flute. Like it just works. It works so well, and. Yeah, it is. It's Picard remembering that entire lifetime that he just lived, and he takes that with him. The flute pops back a few times after this. So, um, uh, so yeah, I really love that story. And yeah, and I agree with you, Darren, that I like the choice, even though I'm typically very much in favor of these anti-war episodes that Star Trek does. I think that, particularly in the original series, I think that was some of their best work. Was the anti-war message that they would have out, and they've done it all throughout Trek. But they have done it a lot, and so it is a nice, refreshing change to do, as you say, more of a celebration of life. Like this is, yeah, we want to celebrate who we were as a people, and we want you to know about it. I think that it's a very touching message, and I think although the anti-war stuff could have been very powerful in its own right, they have done it a lot, and so like I thought that it was a very unique way of telling this story, and I appreciate that they made that change.
Well, and what Chain of Command was earlier in this season, wasn't it?
No,
Or
next
No,
season.
Chain of Command comes
is
later.
the following
Yeah,
season.
the
Okay,
following
I was
season,
going to
yeah.
say I couldn't remember exactly where it was placed, but it's interesting because that is in many ways kind of a Picard war experience type of thing.
Mm.
So it keeps it from being repetitive, and I really like that episode too. So
Yeah, the war, like being beamed in someone's head, that reminds me or makes me think of the Voyager episode Memorial.
I was
I'm
gonna
thinking
say
of
that. Yeah, wasn't there a Voyager episode that ended up doing
Yeah.
something like that? Yeah.
Yeah, and I really like that episode too, but it's not as good as this one. But that might have been the idea, like they might have carried that idea over, because that was about like a sort of, I don't want to say Holocaust, but like a disaster where civilians died and them reliving the trauma. But yeah, it had a good anti-war message. But yes, we mentioned earlier the little flute that Picard was playing, that it was a penny whistle, I believe.
that's what it looks like. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a penny whistle, because I heard that. So the story behind this was I think it was Jay Chataway who composed the music for this episode, was enlisted to sort of come up with the flute for Patrick Stewart to play. But the problem is every actual flute is sort of like this, and none of the producers liked it because that blocks his face. We need something where they can see him. So that's why they did the penny whistle, because at least they can see him. They were just trying to pretend like it's it's a better flute.
Well, good choice not to do the slide whistle, because that would have just looked really silly. If it was just too Riker-esque. That's right. Yeah,
a little silly. Brandon says a tin whistle by the size of it, which leads into lessons. Now, that's a boring episode.
Yeah. Let's see. Jordan is saying only a few episodes brought me to tears before Half a Life is one, and The Visitor came close. Oh, interesting. Not The Offspring. For me, it's The Offspring.
The Offspring.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah. So. Yeah, getting into the music, usually I prefer Dennis McCarthy over Jay Chataway, but he has some good musical scores, and this is easily the best, in my opinion. He also did the music for Scorpion, which is pretty good. But a lot of the times his music will be kind of bland. But he composed the song that Picard plays, and apparently, I don't know if you ever heard, there's an orchestral version. I remember buying it on they had like a 20 or 30th anniversary Star Trek soundtrack, and it's on YouTube now. And yeah, it doesn't appear in this episode, but it's the same music, but like a full orchestral, and I think it was absolutely beautiful. And Jay Chataway talked about how that's by far his most popular piece, that people like, send him videos and stuff of their weddings when they're playing that music at the weddings and stuff like that. So it's like, yeah, it's definitely an accomplishment. It definitely like enhances the story, the motif of the song that, as Brandon mentioned, Lessons will appear again later in that episode as well. But yeah, any thoughts on the music? No, not really. Okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, just as I didn't get a chance to rewatch this episode, so to be honest, I don't really remember the music, so I can't.
Oh, really? Like, yeah, for me, even if I didn't rewatch it, like, I guess because I used to listen to that song a lot, though.
Yeah.
All I hear is the penny whistle.
Yeah, that's all. That's all I can think of too.
But that's not what they actually played to make the music. It's just what they give Patrick Stewart on screen. But no, I think it's absolutely beautiful. Let's see. So yeah, I guess I was gonna save this to the end, but we can talk about this now. Because one of the biggest complaints I've heard, because I think this episode, out of any of the popular episodes, I hear seem to have a more like negative base, being like, this episode's overrated and it sucks. And yeah. It's one YouTuber who makes all these videos on terrible episodes, like Sub Rosa and what's that one? A Night in Sick Bay from Enterprise. She likes to pick on the bad episodes. Did this one and said, "Oh, I hate this," and everyone else is wrong. And I'm like, okay, whatever. But one of the complaints that I heard about this episode is that it's like too episodic, and it doesn't have lasting effects, and it doesn't come back again, and it should have really changed Picard, and it doesn't at all. I disagree with that. So first of all, it's imperial or factually incorrect to say it doesn't come back. It does in the episode Lessons. It's mentioned, and they play the song again, and he tells her about the story and how important it is to him. Although he kind of fucked up because he was like, I haven't told anyone about this. It's like, that was the whole purpose of the probe, is to tell people about it.
They picked the wrong guy though, because Picard doesn't really talk about his like personal experiences. So like,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that is one of the dark sides. It's like, this is a great Picard experience, but whoa, Matt, very lucky first you ran into somebody who kind of looked like you, I'm guessing, maybe. I don't know. Maybe it changes all that. But
yeah.
yeah, he's not a very like storytelling kind of guy.
Yeah. But anyways, come on.
Oh, I was just looking at the chat. Brendan Neilhouse asking if Janelle Was is a channel I'm talking about. No, it's not. I think she's okay with this episode. I don't think she loves it as much as I do, but that's not the channel I was talking
And Jordan is saying what I was thinking too was from the Cupid episode. You've got to understand the captain is a very private man.
No, right, exactly. Well, here I got my headcanon to that is that Picard did tell people about the planet and what they went through and how they experienced this, but left the part about the family and his personal experience out of it. And that's the part that he never shared with anyone else. That's my headcanon in order to make it make sense.
He made a really thorough Wikipedia entry and then moved on.
Yeah. No, the episode that is I think reminiscent of this, except much darker, is the O'Brien episode. What was it, Hard Time or?
Yes, Hard Time.
That one they don't ever follow up on. Like O'Brien has just gone through the world's most traumatic experience that should affect him for the rest of his life. And next episode he's fine. Like,
well, no, what angers me about that, sorry to interrupt, but what angers me about that episode so much is that that's the whole point of the episode. Like they repeat, like trauma doesn't just go away. It stays with you. Like that is the message. And then they undermine the whole thing by just simply going away. It does the one thing it said it wasn't going to do.
Yeah, it's never mentioned again. That is an episode where it's like, it has no lasting effects. This one, it does. It does come back.
Well, I think they're smart to use it, but yeah, it is one of the problems that TNG, I think, as a whole does have it, is there are, I think, quite a few episodes where something big would sort of happen and it doesn't go on. I mean, they do at a point when they do the warp speed limitation for like half a season. I think that had an effect, and there was a couple of other things, but for the most part, I mean, that's the time. It's not until you get into areas where you get like Deep Space Nine and things like that, where you can have longer lasting effects of the characters that move on. But I think at this stage, they were still focused on the episodic nature of television.
Well, and here's the other thing I'll say to that is that I think that you can interpret, even if it's wasn't the writer's intention, you can interpret it having a subtle effect in other episodes, that it maybe affects him personally, but he doesn't outright say it, like the episode where he meets his son. As part of why he was so willing to reconnect with him is because of his need for a family. But the main thing in this, I just watched this recently and I was thinking about it as I was watching, was Generations, when he was in the Nexus and imagined this imaginary family. And I think part of that was because his nephew and brother recently died, but other, I think, has to do with, I think he has an inner, like, stronger, like sort of almost subconscious like need to get back to the family life that he had before, and it did struck me. So even though they didn't mention it, because they're not going to do a deep cut like that in the movie that's meant to apply for a lot of people, would have been cool if they just had the flute there as an Easter egg. That's all I'm saying. but yeah, that's my sort of headcanon, that was sort of included in that. And Jordan Johnson also mentions Generation, saying, remember the last scene, Generations? Can you imagine if Picard picked up the flute and just I would have revolted if they did that. That's in reference to, like, the episode The Chase, Picard's mentor who died right after gave him this priceless artifact. It's like, oh my God, this should be in the museum. It's a priceless artifact. Why are you giving this to me? It's like, absolutely rare and priceless. And in generations, when the Enterprise is destroyed, he picks it up and just tosses it on the floor. I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? But if he would have done that to the flute, that would have been even worse. That would have been unacceptable. So I'm glad they didn't.
Yeah, I don't know how an artifact is priceless in a society that doesn't use money anyways. They were never really consistent with the whole money thing. Yeah, it's priceless because you don't have money. Everything's priceless.
Well, it's rare. It's extremely rare.
Yeah.
It's priceless. Nobody will give me any money for it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to remember if there's other things, but yeah, my bottom line is like that doesn't bother me about this episode. I think those people are wrong because I think you can say it does subconsciously affect his need for a family going forward, and you can even put that all the way to Picard season 3. When he met his son, that it's been driving him sort of subconsciously the whole time, and it has had an effect on them. And they did state it outright in lessons, so I'm not sure. I agree, bringing up Hard Time, like it's way better in Hard Time than because of that. But anyway, that's just me. All right, let's see. Jake came in 99. His nephew was more important than the artifact. Oh, because what he was looking for was a photo album. And they're really gonna have photo albums in the 24th century? Like we barely have them now. But anyways, that's something else. All right. So let's get to the episode. So let's talk about the first part where Picard first shows up in the different life, and he meets Helene and Bataille, and he's very sort of adversarial. This was an interesting way to go at it because they could have made it so he instantly thought he was that person, but instead they just had him maintain being Picard and remembering who Picard is, and his first instinct is to be like, what the fuck is going on? Why am I here? This is not my beautiful wife. Sorry. And how did I get here? And but that was an interesting way to take it, and that he was sort of very adversarial, went for walks. Part of me was kind of thinks this is my least favorite part of the episode, is kind of doing just the that he's upset and blah blah, but I think the more I think about it, the more I think it's necessary, and the more I think it does actually help build that and sort of buy the world. And the other thing I will say is that, in part of what I love this episode, I think the pacing is perfect. I love how they jump, because the next time they jump from this scene, they go 5 years, and they're like, it's been 5 years. And so you can buy that it takes 5 years for him to finally get into this life and finally forget about the Enterprise. So overall, I think it works. Alyssa, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think this works so much better than if they just had him instantly think that he's that person. I love that they had to convince him, and he had to grow into it over a long period of time. I also really appreciate that they kind of push back against a common trope here, because when I'm first watching this and I'm seeing Picard going, "Who are you? Why are you kidnapping me?" My assumption is he has been kidnapped, because that's every friggin' episode ever, that there's some kind of malintent and somebody's trying to kidnap him, trying to get secrets from him for the Federation, and they're just pretending to be nice but really they're going to be evil. And that was my first thought when I very first saw this episode, because that's very typical. That is normally what you would see. So the fact that they just completely disregarded that trope and said, no, these actually are good people, and their point is to for you to pass on the story of this civilization. It's not, there's no nefarious purpose here. These are actually legitimately beautiful, good people. And I love that. I love that they did not fall into that typical trope and did something new and different. So I actually, when I go back and watch it now, I appreciate that they did not go into the typical, like, oh, these are evil people who are capturing him for like some nefarious purpose, which is what I initially thought, because that's what every episode does. So I actually really appreciate that.
Yeah, and I think also the choice of having it be Picard was important because one, it gives him an arc. It gives him a place familiar for us that he starts at, and then a place to go to that we can appreciate that journey. It's also ultimately the purpose of this is to learn the culture, learn about the people, take them into your heart, love them like we love we love our culture. And with it being Picard, that's exactly what he has to do. He has to learn the culture. He has to learn to love it. And he gets to take it into himself. He doesn't awaken thinking, I lived somebody else's life. He lived his life. He took his experiences before, built this on top of this, and then was able to take that back as a self experience and not reporting like, hey, I saw a mental movie of this other guy and his family. It's his story and it's his family. So I think allowing that little bit, again, it allowed us as the audience, through Picard to be pulled into this world and also learn to love it and appreciate the experience. And you're right. I think those time jumps are a great way to leap forward into the important parts. It's when he first arrives. It's when he lets go of his old life and accepts his new life. It's when he starts to have kids, when he learns the danger, when he says goodbye to his wife. Each one has a particular little bit of story, and the in-betweens aren't important. So no, I think they made a great way in the way that they set this up, and the fact that, they allowed it to be him. I also love that it continues the Star Trek vision of the future, is that ultimately what we want is relaxing loungewear, very similar to, like Greek outfits back in the day. That's like, for Star Trek, that's where we're going. We're going back to togas ultimately, and pajamas.
But I mentioned Bataille, and so there was a deleted scene like after Picard first met Bataille. Bataille, it's like, so I made something. I want to show you. It's a jump to conclusions match. And then the counselor guy who was visiting, he comes, is like, yeah, Cayman, I'm gonna need you to work on Saturday, and you can go ahead and work Sunday too.
So that would be the local administrator would be perfect.
They should have gotten that actor, really.
For those of you who don't know what we're talking about, it's a reference to the movie Office Space,
which this predates Office Space.
Oh yeah, but it's the same actor.
It's the same actor.
He did I always, every time I see him, it's like the jump to conclusions.
Oh yeah,
that's what he was in a bunch of other stuff too. Like, I've recognized him when this episode aired. He was in other shows and movies and stuff before this, but I don't know what. But yeah,
I didn't recognize him before this, but I definitely seen him a lot after.
Yeah, no, I remember when this aired. I recognized him, but I don't remember from what anymore. I'll have to look up his Wikipedia page later.
Like every other show, he's just that guy.
Yeah,
he was in that Irish pub episode of Voyager when they're doing that Irish holodeck program.
Yeah,
like one of the Irish people.
Yeah,
anyway.
That also.
All right. Okay. Sorry. So let's. Oh, go ahead.
I did want to comment on one of the comments earlier. Because JK in 99 said they kind of do the evil trope at the end. It takes 5 years for Picard to accept, and like after 35 years, they're finally like, haha, got you, which is heartbreaking. I really disagree with that. Like, I don't think it was evil at all. I think that it wasn't like a haha, got you, like we played a trick on you. It was like, we want you to, this is the true purpose. We want you to pass on our story. And like, I don't know. I don't know. I guess I didn't see it that way. I don't think it was evil at all.
No, I agree. I mean, it was. I don't like. He's, he was sad, of course, but he had that like lived experiences. He probably prefers to have it. He probably wouldn't give it up.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and he gets to see his wife again, and and all the people who died, he gets to see them again, and
and it's a great example of how technology can evolve differently. I mean, they barely had rocket technology, and yet they could do mental programming and experiential stuff far beyond any hologram programs. But
and yeah, so you did touch on what I think is the biggest plot hole, biggest flaw, and it's a huge plot hole of the episode. But since I love the episode so much and it's such a great character piece, that's something I'm willing to hand wave away and be like, yeah, Court, that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, but it's an amazing episode.
So. No, actually, it does make sense, and I think Darrin might have been facetious there, but I actually think different societies can develop different kinds of technology. Like they're really focusing heavy in on the memory department.
We never see anything about how the culture learns or their data storage or anything like that, or books or things like that. So they left it loose enough where we don't really see their technology. Again, they just like pajamas.
So that's true that the different species develop in different ways, but for me that's still, even considering that, it's still really stretching it. It's really stretched because they were able, like, they just shoot little rockets and they live in these quaint little villages, and they're like, oh, it can't even build atmospheric whatever the hell Picard was talking about building, and yet they can send this probe that can last 1,000 years and is able to attach itself to an alien race that they had no idea existed, and is able to latch on so closely that none of the Enterprise's technology is able to sever the beam and implant a perfect memory. Yeah, it's stretched.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not bothered. I've always been way more bothered by the episode Conundrum, where those aliens that
that is worse. I agree.
They have like weak ass like ships and like no technology and like no weapons, and yet they have the ability to erase everyone's memory. Like that, like that bothers me way more than this does.
But I've heard people use this.
We make a lot.
Excuse saying that, I've heard people with that episode Conundrum use the same excuse, saying, oh, they're just further along in the brainwashing technique. Which might make sense if Data wasn't there. Like, oh, so they also know how to manipulate a freaking positronic android? Get the fuck out of here. But anyway.
Consciousness is really a universal concept, man. Their technology is working on a quantum level that you just don't understand. I don't know where that came from, but okay, look, the one thing about this planet is their special little government department of plot convenience that was able to develop the right technology for the right time. And, that was their ability. That's the real magic of this episode. But I mean, I honestly, I have to agree. While it is, you're right. I am being a bit facetious in joking at it. Technologies can move differently, and ultimately, if that's what you're focusing on with this episode, fine. Then you've already missed everything else. That's not what the episode's about. That's just the setup in order to make things happen. And I think, because it's Star Trek, I tend to be willing to go with it.
The thing is, I actually think, if I compare this Conundrum, I actually think that I buy this less then I buy the conundrum thing. But the thing is that this is a way, 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 way better episode than Conundrum. So I'm willing to forgive it a lot more than I am with Conundrum, where the Conundrum, because I'm too involved, I'm too invested in this episode to give a shit. Whereas Conundrum, the whole time I'm thinking, what? This doesn't make any sense. But that is just me. All right. Oh,
So they just need to distract you for 44 minutes, and then they're able to move on.
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of plot holes. I mean, and the one that I've focused on more than that one is that so this probe apparently only hit one person because the flute was still in the probe, which means it never came across anyone else in 1,000 years. It's just like floating out there. And like it took 1,000 years for a ship to come across it that it like find someone to attach to. Like that just seems like the odds of that happening are astronomical.
Actually, I don't have a problem with that one because space is vast. Like space is.
They go where no one has gone before.
so that part doesn't bother me.
But like, I mean, in 1,000 years, there's so many ships constantly going around everywhere. It wasn't like they were in some remote part of space or anything. No, I buy that one way less than I'm bothered
because
by
in the
that
parallel universe
more.
where the Klingons came up against it, it was a very short episode. Shoot the probe and kill the captain. Oh well, I'm the new captain. Dun, dun, dun.
Can you imagine if the Ferengi found it? They're like, "Where's the prophet? Give me all of your latinum." Yeah, no.
But Glortak, did the planet have resources?
Yeah, the odds of that are just unbelievably astronomical. No,
I
no
disagree.
Way.
I disagree
no way.
Because space is freaking vast.
That's not the way it's portrayed in Star Trek, though. You see ships flying around all the time. In 1,000 years, no ship would ever.
Yeah, but
in 1,000 years, no way.
No, see, I disagree on that one, but we'll have to agree to disagree. But
it is funny though, is I am less concerned about that a little bit than the technology a little bit. I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. It's just that's a Star Trek episode. Ancient technology. This is the first time it's run into it.
Yeah, no, I'm less. I'm
I
more
think
bothered by that than I am like the technology thing. The technology thing makes sense to me. This does not.
Well, I feel the opposite. But anyway, but I think what Brandon says in the chat is a bigger complaint. It just only Picard, like it happens to hit the main character of the show. That's serendipity. Like it didn't hit some random incident in the lower decks or something. But that's something that's a Star Trek thing. You know that all the major shit only happens to the main characters unless you're on lower decks.
Yeah.
Well, lower decks are the main characters.
So the main characters. Yeah, true. Yeah. The senior staff, I should have said.
The variation of this, it was Barclay who hit it, and he just had whole little side story for Dwight Schultz there.
He would just recreate his family in the holodeck and go live in there.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. 1,000 years of just this one main character of the captain of the main starship. No. No. I just don't buy it. But anyways, we can move on.
Okay, all right. I want to get to a complaint that other people have that I totally disagree with. Is that, and I've heard, several people complain about, even those who like this episode will say, oh, but we didn't need those scenes on the Enterprise. They should have just stuck with Picard the whole time. I hate the scenes on the Enterprise. We don't need to go back and forth. And I completely disagree. First of all, it's a great way to break up the time jumps. And secondly, it's good to see what Picard is experiencing like in real life, like outside of his visions, what's going on with his body, what's happening, how he's in peril. It also drives home the fact that it's happening like in the span of 20 minutes. Yes, at the end of the episode, they state Oh yes, it's been 20 minutes, but still, I think seeing it and seeing how, especially the moment when they try to disconnect him from the beam and the memories he's having like a heart attack, like that was great. Like that's great. So I completely disagree with the people that say that. However, on one thing, and this is a minor nitpick, so I don't really care, but I will grant them. Why don't they never, I mean, they could have said, oh, it's too dangerous to move Picard, but they never stated why he's just lying on the floor on the bridge and why they didn't move him to the sick bay. And the actual reason of why they did that is because it was a production reason. They didn't want to have to film sick bay. They're like, oh, let's just keep him on the bridge and keep everything there. But it was weird. Like they didn't even put like a pillow under his head or anything. They just had him lying on the floor the whole time. But no, but overall, I disagree. I think I love those scenes. Darrin, your thoughts on that?
No, I think it is important because you want to see again, and Jordan mentions that here in the chat. It's great we just see how much this affects the crew who love him so much. What happened? Oh, you were around for 20 minutes. Well, what were you doing? We had a smoke. Worf went down and grabbed some food. We just sort of watched him. I mean, there wasn't anything we'd do, so we didn't want to move you. I mean, that's not going to be a very representative of how the crew is. So, yeah, I think you're right. I think it does a great way to break up the little time jumps that we see Picard go through, and a way of involving the crew and show that they are like trying to do things to save their captain in this unknown circumstance. I think it would have ended up being a loss if he just beamed out and then he just woke up and everybody's around and you're like, what's wrong? You were out for about 20 minutes. We may buy it, but I think there would be a lot of people that were like, so what? They just, like you're saying, they just left him on the ground there. They didn't move him. They didn't check out here. He should be hooked up to machines and stuff like that. So no, I think it ended up working for it. I think it would have been weird without it.
And it's a difference between knowing as you watch the episode that Picard is experiencing years in minutes, or it being like this big reveal at the end. Because if they didn't have that, you wouldn't necessarily know that. In real life, Picard is only experiencing minutes. You would think that maybe he got transported to this planet and actually is living this whole life. And then It would be like this big reveal. Ha! He's been laying on the ground the whole time and it's only been 20 minutes, where that doesn't work for me. I think this is a much better way to do it so that you are experiencing it as you watch. Like, oh, wow, look at this. He's like living this entire lifetime and while he's laying on the ground in a few minutes. It makes it a completely different episode. And I would dare say a much better episode of the way that they did do it. And the other part of it for me is I mentioned that the reason why this isn't like my number one Next Generation episode, because I do before that ensemble, I want to see the other characters. I want to see how they're reacting. I want to see them. Like, to never see the other characters at all, I wouldn't have liked that either. So yeah, I 1,000,000% disagree with that opinion personally. Like, I think that it was essential to have those scenes. If anything, I might argue maybe a little bit more of that, not less. But I actually think it's probably perfect what they did. But if I were to argue one way or the other, I would ask for more of those scenes rather as opposed to less of them. So I completely disagree.
Yeah, it does make me wonder that, and because that's a good point you bring up of how it makes it more of a aha, gotcha, because the audience would be thinking that he was actually transported to a planet. So it makes me wonder if that's what these other people were complaining, if that's what they prefer, if that's why they didn't like this. Oh, I'd rather not know and rather be a surprise. And if that's the case, I totally agree with you that detracts from the episode. That would be distracting if you're thinking, oh, he's on some other planet or what exactly is going on. That it clears all that stuff so you know what's going on, so you can focus on the character story of what's happening with Picard, which is much more important. And the episode does have kind of a gotcha, sort of, because Picard doesn't know what's going on when the big thing is revealed to him that this is what the probe means or whatever. I mean, the audience could mostly figure this out for themselves, but still, like, it allows, like, having that, not trying to focus on too much of what a twist. It allows you to focus more on what's important in the episode.
Well, yeah, and I think also it allows us to go with Picard's dismissal of the Enterprise crew because we know that he is still there. Because he was so far, if they just went, well, it's 5 years later, yeah, I should stop thinking about that crew and move on with my life. We're like, what are you talking about? The Enterprise is the family. Those are the real people that love you and you're willing to give up. You're right. If you think that he was kidnapped and he's just giving in and living this life, I think we would, from an audience standpoint, feel betrayed if you didn't thus spend more time. We get more of that stuff, or him trying to find the truth and going on his hikes and looking at things. I think this was an excellent way to, as Alyssa said, keep that tension, keep that idea that this is all happening in a very fast period of time, while also going, so Picard's okay, so let's just move on with his experience. I think it's an excellent way to separate those so we can go with the actual, like you said, the meat of the story, as opposed to being distracted with, well, are the Enterprise looking for him? How far did he go? Is he still in Federation space? You can skip all of that and focus on the story that they're telling.
Yeah. And the ending it is still a little bit of a surprise ending because, as I mentioned earlier, like, I'm thinking in terms of previous Star Trek episodes where there's some sort of nefarious purpose, and there really wasn't. Like, and so I think the first time I watched this episode, the whole time I'm still in the back of my head, like, what is their goal here? What are they trying to do? I'm not, I'm thinking they're probably benevolent, but still in the back of my mind, like, there could still be some evil purpose here. But then at the end, I was like, no, we want you to tell our story. I thought that was a beautiful ending. To me, it subverted expectations because that's not necessarily what I was expecting to be the ending when I first saw it. So there's still a little bit of a surprise, but it's not a ha 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 like.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think this is why, part of the reason why I love this episode much and why I think it's so brilliant is that they fought those instincts to make it like a typical episode where it's something nefarious, because that is a typical episode. That would, if they would have done it to be something nefarious, it'd be like, oh yeah, this is just another, we gotta make a threat. And they really rarely can fight that need. Like, the studio usually pushes, oh, there has to be a threat, there needs to be a threat, and there wasn't. Instead, you have a beautiful character story, and if it was a threat, it would have just been another fucking typical episode.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, I saw this recently without giving spoilers for those who haven't seen it, but the penultimate episode of Lower Decks, which everyone praises as one of the greatest episodes ever. I also thought it was a great episode, but one of my problems was that they did have to insert a plot. Like, this is a nefarious thing that this character is doing that I didn't think should have been there. And like, that is to be able to resist that urge we have to have a bad guy. Like, I love that they were able to do that, that they were able to resist that urge and create something I thought was really beautiful.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and that Lower Decks episode, that makes no sense. That was so dumb. They did it as partly a joke, but anyway.
Yeah, partly was a joke, but it was also like, it was
still dumb. It was just, yeah. But anyway.
Yeah. But anyway. I don't think Darren's seen it, so I don't want to spoil it.
Oh, yeah. So,
no, but I did get to see Section 31. Well, correction. I watched the first 10 minutes of it before I turned it off. So
yeah, that's more than
sounds right. Yeah. That sounds about right.
Oh boy.
I wanted to, but I forced myself to watch it. But anyway.
Anyways, moving on.
Yeah, so I want to talk about Picard raising children. I think again the way that they do the time jumps, they hit the important moments. Like you really feel like in those absences, whenever they have a time jump, you don't feel like you're missing something. You feel like it makes sense. Like the scenes really fill in the blanks, and so it goes from the scene, which was a very lovely scene. There's so many in these episodes. In this episode, it's so good with Picard saying, "Oh, I need your permission to build a nursery." It's like they had a fight earlier, and then he's talking about building a nursery, which means he wants to have kids, and then they just jump to the second kid having the celebration. Oh yeah, by the way, Bataille died. Like it's just it's perfect in jumping from that to seeing the kids that are older. I don't know. Are you aware? Just a quick question. I'll ask Darrin. Maybe Alyssa knows this, but do you know who played his Picard's son in this episode?
The older one?
Yeah.
I don't. He did look kind of familiar, but again, there's so much of that guy from that show that goes on with his. But no, I did not recognize who that was.
Did you know, Alyssa? Oh, it's Patrick Stewart's son.
Oh, okay, very sweet. That explains why it had a familiar look to him.
Yeah. It was funny because I think I was watching a review with someone like, "Oh, who did get to play Picard's son? He looks nothing like him." And someone was like, "Oh, that's actually Patrick Stewart's son." Like, oh, but yeah. So that was a nice little thing. But yeah, that moment where he's like, "Oh, my music," and Picard's eventually like, "Oh, yeah, okay, fine, you go ahead and do your music thing." But also, one of my favorite moments is when he's talking to his daughter and talking about how the world is doomed, and she eventually says, "You know what? I think I should marry this dude sooner rather than later." And you get one of my favorite speeches or lines of dialogue in the entire show where Picard just flat out says, "Make now the important thing. Live for now, because now will never come again." And that always stuck with me, and I think that's a very important life lesson to have, to try to always cherish the moment. Don't be stuck in the past or thinking of the future. It's very sort of Buddhist, for sort of Zen like philosophy, but just the way he sells it, and especially in the context of they know their world is dying and none of them are going to live longer, so it makes total sense in that context. But still, in general, it's a great sort of philosophy to have, and that line has always stuck with me. But anyway, Alyssa, we'll start with you on Picard raising kids.
Yeah, I'll start where you left off with that line, because I always love that line too, and it's good philosophy. I used to, like, when I was younger, read like Zen Buddhist books and things like that, and it's always like a way of looking at things that that's really stuck with me. And especially when we're living in really hard times, like that's kind of how I get through it, is like enjoying the moments that I have. But as for him raising kids, what this reminds me of is a show that came out many years later, a little show two of you may have heard of, maybe we've talked about it before, called House of the Dragon, where they do something similar, where they okay, this kid's a baby, oh look, now he's 10 years old, oh look, now he's a teenager. And that was done, spread throughout the season, and I dare say they did it better in here with like a 44-minute episode or whatever they had to do, because they just hit on exactly the right beats. Which I think is a point you made too, Mark. Is like they knew exactly what to show you, and like what was relevant and what was important, and the rest you can fill in the blanks. So it's really beautifully done. The way that they progress through time, and jump through the raising of his kids, and when it's all said and done, you feel, even though you've seen these kids grow up in like 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever over the course of this 48-minute episode or whatever it is, like you feel that he has this love for these kids, the attachment that he has from what they mean to him. A lot of that is Patrick Stewart's acting, of course, but I think that the way that it is written, it really sells it too. The how they just show you like the important moments in each of these kids' lives, I think is really well done.
Yeah, and I think that part of what makes this so much better than House of the Dragon is that they space out like the spacing of each time they spend on each different time periods about even. The problem with House of the Dragon, they were like spent so much time, like 4 episodes is one time period, and all of a sudden jump like 15 years, then jump again, and it's uneven, and that's what makes you feel disjointed. Where here it's like the way they space it evenly, like I think really works.
Well, and they were great too with hitting. I mean, when they had, Picard or Gillian said it himself. It's like, I never even thought about family, and now I can't imagine not having kids. You know, I think that's kind of an important thing, especially of what we know of Picard, is seeing that, oh, this really has made a huge change and impact, because, yeah, that is never something that Picard would have wanted and would have done. Again, it's that shift of character. And he does get to have those little moments where he's like, the gruff father that, yeah, well, I'll agree with you because I love you and it's the right thing to do, when he's dealing with his son, or especially in with his daughter, of finding she's just like you. They established that very quickly, running out and around doing that, not listening. That sounds like someone familiar. Oh, she wants to be a scientist. Of course she is. She's going to follow in her dad's footsteps. I think that's another great way of bringing those connections into it. So when the kids and he do have those little moments, you already have a picture in with you. Like Alyssa was saying, you get to fill in those moments because they're hitting just the right little points in between, so that you can create the evolution in life between them.
Indeed. So yeah, Brandon in the chat saying, I think it's said that Patrick Stewart is estranged from his children in real life. I did not know that. That I did not know. That is kind of sad. I thought I heard something that he cheated on his wife with the actress who played Vosh around the time they filmed those episodes. Yeah, I don't know if that's true.
This is why I like to avoid all of the gossip. I just want to focus on Captain Picard and Gandalf having fun in the streets of London. That's the only image I want to stick with.
Fair enough. He does a lot of good charity work.
I believe you mean Professor X and Magneto, but
Professor X and Magneto. Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, they were the bestest friends.
All right, so let's get to one of my favorite scenes of the episode is the death of Helene, which apparently written by Peter Allen Fields. I think the whole relationship between the two of them really, really works. Like, she's a very it seems like a realistic marriage, but a very healthy one as well. And I think the way it built up towards the start, with her getting upset with him for ignoring her and not accepting his life, but then they and they feel like a married couple as well. And I think the actress, by the way, this is I believe one of her first acting jobs she's ever done. I think she does an amazing job. I imagine part of that is working with Stewart, because you could see the way she sells it. And yeah, this death scene doesn't really look like she's dying, but I don't really care, because it is such a powerful scene. Just you feel the connection between these two characters, and this is when my eyes start watering a bit. And it's combined, of course, with him, thinking he's going to lose his job because he tells the other dude about with the planet really dying. But when he tells her, no, it's not, he already knew, so don't worry, but my job's fine. And she's like, good, I'm happy. And then it has that connects with him in that moment. I just think it's an absolutely beautiful scene. But Darrin, we'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those that are simple. It's not it's a drama you don't even really know. And then it's like, oh, she has been having health problems. and it's a very simple, very peaceful death. But yeah, I think in those last little moments, again, it's the things that they have had this long life together in this connection. Don't forget your shoes. All
Oh
right,
yeah.
get these things. I'm going. I'm not going to be able to be there for you to do this, so you've got to be on top of it. And and yeah, I mean, Stewart is responding off of her. They're feeding each other back and forth really beautifully in this scene. I completely agree with you. She does an amazing job with this. But yeah, it's just like everything else in this. It is simple and straightforward and emotionally impactful and doesn't try to do more than it needs to. And I think that's the only way that this episode really carries its story the way that it needs to in the period of time that it has, is to keep all of these very focused. And this is just a sweet kind of like little moment between the two of them. And like I said, giving indications of this long life and this connection and acknowledgement that this is a passing.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. That's very well said. I think the simplicity of each scene, um, paired with just how poignant it is, how powerful it is, and this scene in particular, I think, yeah, it's very straightforward and it's very simple. But we don't see her a whole lot in this episode before that, really. I mean, if you look at the total screen time, and yet it feels like we have, because you just feel it. And part of that is her performance. And I do think, like, I feel like I can tell through a lot of this episode that this is one of her first acting gigs, because I don't think she's always a great actress in this episode, but she delivers when it counts, which is this scene. She's fantastic, and so is Patrick Stewart. So, yeah, it's again just like they just each scene just like packs a punch and just like makes it, yeah, makes you feel it, even though you've seen this character on screen, what, 15 minutes total at that, 10 minutes, you haven't seen this character on screen much, but you feel it. And so it's well written and well acted.
So from there, we jump to you can tell there's a significant time jump because Picard has grandkids now, and they're playing around. You can tell that he's moved on with his life, and he's completely forgotten about the Enterprise. But then they're like, "Oh, let's go see the launching," and they're like, "What the hell are you talking about? What launching is that?" And that's, of course, you get the big reveal. Again, this is when the tears start flowing a bit for me, seeing his friend Bataille just appeared. Oh, yes, you have, old friend, and then his wife is there and sort of explaining what the purpose of the probe is. And I love, like, again, amazing acting all around, except for that little kid in that one scene when the family's standing there. You can tell the kid's just like being distracted by something and not paying attention. But other than that, amazing acting. And you can tell that, the way that Picard responds was like, "Oh, it's me, isn't it?" Like him realizing what's going on. It's just absolutely beautiful moment. Alyssa, let's start with you on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of talked about this a little bit already. I find that this was just, it was a great reveal. It was a great way to tie it all together, because I personally didn't really necessarily figure out exactly what was happening. Like until they start talking about the probe or whatever. I'm like, oh, okay. So, but I thought it was a really great reveal. I thought that the way that it was done, uh, I just loved I think bringing back those characters, bringing back Bataille, bringing back his wife, I think really adds to that. So that before he returns to his life as Picard, he does get to see these people he loved one more time, and just kind of ties everything together nicely. I thought it was a beautiful reveal. I really love this ending scene.
Oh yeah, I mean, I am tearing up literally just thinking about how the whole bit. And yeah, when he's like, "It's me, isn't it?" It's like, I mean, it's just, and to me, this is also the great thing about this is by bringing Pattaya back, by bringing his wife back, it's not an evil plot. It's not a deception. It's no, this is why you were here. This is the thing that you found, and it was there so you could experience us, so we wouldn't be forgotten. And again, from family, from people he's loved. See, I'm getting emotional even just talking about it. It's you folks cry because I can't do it. Thank you, Brandon. That's what we're here for. Um, it is. It's a beautiful little reveal. It's a nice, again, simple way. It does it lovingly, and with the rocket going, it's a way of sending him off back to the Enterprise as well. So you get the kind of visual tie-ins on it all. So no, I mean, to me, this is the perfect way to do this. Maybe only bettered by our final scene that we get that we'll talk about in a minute. Yes, it is, Brandon. My voice is breaking.
All right. Well, let's talk about it now. So, this is really when the tears start screaming, and this is why I love this episode so much. I mean, many reasons, obviously, but this is its crowning achievement is that they're managed. I can think of very few shows or movies that manage to sell such a moment just on such a subtle thing. And also so first of all, when Picard first wakes up, again, Patrick Stewart, amazing actor. The way he plays this, you can tell he's discovering his life. He's like Dr. Crusher. He's looks around very confused, like what? And it's taking him a while because he just experienced this entire life and how weird it is. And even after that scene, you see him in his quarters kind of looking around, sort of rediscovering his life and everything that was. And I mean, I kind of get what people saying that they could have carried this on for other episodes, but it still works. I don't think it's that big of a deal. But no, the moment that they're able to sell just him playing the flute, that they're able to convey so much emotion and so much power from a simple. I can't believe you guys don't remember this song. This song is so good, it's so memorable. But the way that he's playing it and the ship just going around, and again, it was a beautiful production note to rather than to play other music, they just cut to the Enterprise flying, and you get the producers' names, and just over that continuation of him playing the flute. It was absolutely beautiful way to end the episode. And I was talking earlier about how Morgan Gindel knew, and I can't believe that, that it can understand how, that's kind of silly, he's playing a flute, but it's such a subtle and simple and perfect way to just express everything that he's feeling. And this is kind of why I kind of sort of like the episode Lessons, because I can think back to this episode when he's playing that song to just exactly how meaningful it is for him. But anyway, Alyssa, we'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, it's a good thing Michael Piller agreed to that flute scene.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as I said, I can see at the surface, you just talking about it, just hearing, say, oh, he's gonna play this flute. I'm like, oh, that's ridiculous. But it is the perfect ending for this episode because it shows us that Picard lived this full life, that it's still a part of him and will always be a part of him. Because if they didn't have him playing the flute, then maybe I would agree with a lot of the people who said that, oh, well, he just forgets about it. If he did not have the flute, I think the flute was actually very key to showing, regardless of whether it obviously did come back in another episode, but even if it didn't, I think just ending it this way shows that it has an impact on him. And in this case, I feel like it would be hard to just continuing to bring it up when you have other episode plots that you need to deal with. I think that you can have little reminders for it, but to constantly have him reference this, I don't think works, because you are making a largely episodic show. But I think they do a good enough job of referencing it throughout. But without the flute, you have none of that. I think that was I think is the most important part of this episode to show the impact that it has on Picard.
Yeah. Well, again, I can get the idea of kind of like the goofy and the flute, and then he gets it at the end or so on, though in a way, just from a mass space standpoint, if you're going to send something on a satellite, on a trip, on a probe without, and you're new to rocketry and thus space and weight is a big thing, a flute is an excellent example of a culture in a way, of its music and a thing. And if you have this thing that's going to bring something, a transfer of memory or experience to somebody else in order to remember your culture, this is an easy thing to kind of carry around. So from a practical standpoint, I get the idea with the flute. I also get the idea of kind of like, that's goofy. What sells it again to me is this scene and Stewart. I love, when Riker, drops it off and says, hands it to him, and then he does a very respectful like acknowledgement and step out. I think he does a very subtle but beautiful just little communication right there. You're right. I love how much Stewart is transitioning back into this world from the one that he was living in for so long, and how he has to kind of catch up. I love that they give those moments at the end. But when he opens that thing up and picks up and then just turns and does that like hug, just pulls it to his breast, to me, that's what sells it. That's the thing. He has become part of this culture. This culture has become part of him. And now this one last remnant of it that he learned to play, that became a thing, that was a family stuff, that was a culture thing that had so much represented in there, is now returned to him. He only has memories, but now he has something physical that he can bring forward. Without him selling that, it wouldn't have worked as well. But I think he made it work.
Absolutely. And I think I think that in the context of the story it works as well. But yeah, Stewart's performance definitely helps. But because it's really, it signifies the fact that, because once he wakes up from the probe, like, you're not sure exactly how much he remembers of what's going on. But the fact that he didn't know how to, they made it clear he had no idea how to play the flute. And after these 20 minutes, he can play it perfectly. So it's making it clear that that experience stuck with him. It's a very subtle, beautiful way to do it. And also all the emotions that come with it, of him missing his family and stuff like that. Yeah. And that lived experience he now has. Yeah. I think it's perfect. It's part of the reason why I love this.
Yeah, and I agree that leaving with just him playing the flute and the Enterprise falling off with just that music kind of falling behind, you're right. I think that is the perfect way to end it. And in fact, this is one where I did have to jump and hit the stop button, because it has that beautiful, quiet, haunting music of the flute, and then and I'm like, okay, stop that. Kind of ruins that moment there. So
it's episodic television.
Yeah, it's what you got to do. But yeah, definitely on that one. At the end of the flute, when the credits come up in the flat, then hit the pause or back button and move on to the next episode.
But yeah, and in the chat they were asking what Kamen's profession was, and Brandon says Iron Weaver has no idea what that means. I thought it was very clear he was a scientist. He kept talking about being a scientist. Now,
but what did he do? Like, a scientist can mean like a lot of things. Like, what exactly was his job? Like,
yeah, to me, Iron Weaver was like a blacksmith that he made things.
Well, they talked about him like doing studies and running experiments, doing scientist stuff.
He was sciencing.
Yeah.
He was sciencing around.
Yeah, I guess I got that the science was his hobby that he did, because that's what he's bringing from Picard's experience is science. But for Kamen's, he was an Iron Weaver, which I got that he make things. So to me, that allowed him to make the scientific instruments he was using.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I put it together. But yeah, again, they don't focus too much on it, and probably not totally necessary.
Yeah. Oh no, Brandon quoting from Memory Alpha. Yeah, no, that's. I think that's. Yeah, I think that's what they're implying. That's what he did before. The episode start. But I don't know, that one scene where he's talking to his daughter, I think he just made it very clear that they're scientists and that's their profession. That's what I got out of it anyway. But anywho, yeah, so amazing episode. Absolutely loved it. So now time for the titular question. Alyssa, I already know your answer, so you can go ahead. Actually, I probably know both your answers because I don't think you both have this at number 2 or 1. So this high, but would you have it around the same, higher, lower? Alyssa, let's start with you.
Yes, and in my top 100, which I did about a year and a half ago, it came in at number 19, which is still, again, I want to remind you, in the top 25. There's like 800 something episodes. I still consider it one of the top Impact 20 episodes in the entire series, but I don't have it quite as high as number 2. For reasons which I spoke about earlier. But then, I mean, once you get into the top 25, you're picking nits. We're talking about great episodes of Star Trek, and you have to pick your little nits to see which ones are number 19 as opposed to number 2. So, yeah, great episode. But yeah, I have it a little bit lower down than you at my number 19.
Right. And yeah, this would be probably a little further from the position of number 2 here on mine. It is a great episode, and it's definitely one that I've come to appreciate more, just because of, again, the simplicity of the story, what it's doing, and from a season standpoint of giving a breath before you get into more things. Sometimes you can't have everything all raw action. You've got to step back to give some pace and depth in this. And this is one of those that does it in a very powerful and unexpected way. Again, you're like, the flute episode, and then you watch it just like, oh my God, this is so good. So yeah, it'd be a little further away. And that's only because there are certain styles of episodes that to me are a lot more interesting when you get a lot more like what we did with your number 3 there, that's really dealing with a lot of philosophical questioning of, bits of what's right, what's wrong, where do we cross the line. There's a number of episodes that kind of deal with this that just ring a little stronger with me. So, like Alyssa, this would probably be in the top 20, top 25 with me. It's definitely one of the better episodes. I just think it would probably not rank quite as high as number 2 for me.
So this is my favorite episode of Next Generation. Alyssa's stated before that yesterday's Enterprise is hers. What would be yours, Darrin?
Yeah, I would probably be leaning a lot more towards yesterday's Enterprise. Cause and Effect I really like too, which is from earlier in this particular season. But yeah, that's one of those, again, that just, it raises some interesting questions and has some interesting viewpoints that just grabs me a little bit more. So yeah, I definitely probably be, yesterday's Enterprise probably is my favorite of Next Generation. But there's a few, and especially that's the fun thing about doing this whole countdown with both of you, is I'm rewatching episodes that I haven't seen in so long and remembering like, oh, wow, this one really did have a bigger impact on me than I thought it did at the time. And then a few others where I'm just like, oh, yeah, I never really cared for that. So it's been kind of a fun experience going, reliving all of that stuff.
Awesome. So Brandon saying also favorite episode for him. And Jordan asked, where did the viewership place this episode again? It was number 3. What was number 2 again? Number 4 was Best of Both Worlds. Number 1 was Yesterday's Enterprise. What was number 2? Oh, why am I blanking on? Yes, it was All Good Things. There you are. Number 2 was All Good Things. So, yeah, this was number 3. Yeah. All right. So, yeah, that wraps it all up, as they say. Yeah, and I will say that I mentioned this before, Alyssa, that all of my top 25 is in your top 100. There's no episode that wasn't on it. So
Yeah.
we do some, things similar. And also, you're like, once you get down to the top 25, especially the whole franchise makes up thousands of episodes or something, you're really picking nits about what's closer.
Well, not to spoil anything, I won't say what it is, but I know what your number 1 is, and I can say it is not in my top 25, but it is in my top 100. So
it is in your top 100. Yeah.
And I was going to ask how that reversed. Is all of her is all of Alyssa's top 25 in your top 100?
Actually, no.
Yeah.
Well, I haven't done my top 100 yet, but there's one episode I'm sure wouldn't make it, which is the naked time. You know that?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the only one in there for sure. But all the other ones I think would be.
But, George Takei shirtless doing fencing down the hallways, and that's not. I can't even.
Mean, how for real? Yeah.
No beach to walk on. But anyway.
But what about the naked now?
Oh, well, that's definitely in my top 25.
That's worst. My top 25 worst episode.
Yeah.
All right.
As long as we're clear on that one. Yeah.
So, so if you guys just want to give a shout out to what you're up to, what's going on, where people can find you, that sort of thing, we'll start with Alyssa.
Hi, yeah, you can find me on Alyssa Jean's Reviews, or at least you can find things that I've done previously. Not currently doing anything. We'll probably do another live chat with Wine next month in March, so you can join me for that. Otherwise, just watch out all the great content that I have related to Star Trek, and my top 10 of 2024 is still out there. So, yeah, go check me out.
Excellent. And I'm over at D's Reviews, which has been quiet for a while, but we've got some new stuff coming up. I will be covering Daredevil Born Again. So that'll be starting early in March. And I am currently over with Rob at Smirking Gun Reviews doing Severance Season 2 on Friday nights. We had a little bit of a delay, so we just covered episodes 4 and 5 in a back-to-back episode on Saturday. But we'll be back this Friday to cover episode 6. So, so some little stuff going on, but, and of course, I will be back here for the number 1 discussion. Can't wait for that, which I'm sure will be sometime next month. Is that right?
That's correct.
Excellent.
Next
Nick
month,
came in 99 saying the Neelix episode is Mark's number 1. Do you mean Tuvix? Is that what you're talking about?
No, that's it exactly. Neelix is definitely in my number for sure. All right. And yes, I would like to thank everyone, especially Alyssa and Darrin. Thank you as always for joining. Great to join. And thanks for everyone watching, everyone who popped in the chat, Jordan, JK99, Brandon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. Always great to have you. And if you are finding me for the first time, my name is Mark. My channel is Enchantment of Eternity. Currently doing the idiotic thing of covering every single episode of the entire Star Trek franchise. I'm up to Deep Space Nine Season 3, just about to start Voyager. Hooray. And we'll be covering that. I have tons of other Star Trek videos on my channel. I'm just about to wrap up my top 25, as we say, next month. But so that's what's coming on the channel. You can find me there. And thanks everyone so much for joining, and we shall see you next time.
Bye-bye.